Hola, it's Anna Rivas. It is October 9th, 2017. I'm going to be doing Lab 6.
Five.
An overview of the axial and appendicular skeleton part 2, where I will be going over the different bones throughout our body. So we're going to start with explaining the bones of the axial skeleton. We're going to start with the frontal or the anterior part of the skull. So bringing our skeleton closer, we're going to begin with the forehead bone, medically known as the frontal bone. We also have the nasal bone, which is right above the two bones that separate our nostrils. Those two bones are our ethmoid bone, which is superior to our vomer bone. So ethmoid and vomer bone. And then we have our upper jaw, which is our maxilla bone. Maxilla. And then we have our movable part of our jaw, our lower jaw, which is our mandible, which can move. We also have our zygomatic bone. Our zygomatic bone, you can see, attaches to our temporal bones. We can also see our parietal bones right over here. Moving back to our orbit area, we have the sphenoid bone, which is deep to the superficial part of the eye. It's the bone behind our eye. We have our lacrimal bone, which is our tear ducts, right next to our tear ducts, so to the corner of our eye. We're going to move to the posterior part of the skull, the back of the skull. So we have the occipital bone right here. Once again, we can see the parietal bones, which are these two bones right here. We can also see the mandible from the posterior view as well. This is our lower jaw. So next we are going to describe the lateral skull. The lateral skull is the side of the head. So bringing our skeleton closer once again, we can see the temporal bone. We can also see the parietal bone right above that, our frontal bone. Inferior to our frontal bone, we have our nasal bone. Inferior to our nasal bone, we have the two bones that help, along with the cartilage of our nose, to divide our nostrils, and those would be our ethmoid bone, and inferior to that, our vomer bone. We also have our upper jaw, which is our maxilla. Our mandible we can also see once again, which is our lower jaw that can move. We also have our zygomatic bone, our zygomatic process. We can also see our lacrimal bone, which is right over where the tear duct would be, right over here on the side. Next, we're going to move into the vertebral column of the axial skeleton. So starting with our first 7 vertebrae, they are called the cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae, which is the first 7 vertebrae. However, the first 2 vertebrae, which is the atlas and the axis, those are specified due to their high priority and function of movement of the head and stability. The next group of vertebrae that we have is called our thoracic vertebrae. These are the most abundant vertebrae. There are 12 of them to be exact. They're what help the structure of the thoracic cavity. So they're right here. These 12. Next we have our lumbar vertebrae, which is our lower back vertebrae. There are 5 of these. Inferior to our lumbar vertebrae, we have our sacrum, which is one whole binded piece right here. And inferior to that, we have our coccyx, which is what is the tail-like bone. And that is our vertebral column of the axial skeleton. Next, we're going to discuss the thoracic cage of the axial skeleton. So moving our skeleton closer once again, we have, starting with the different types of ribs, we have true ribs, which is what connects to our sternum. We have the body of the sternum. We also have the manubrium of the sternum, which is up here. We have false ribs, which attach through cartilage right over here. And then we have floating ribs, which as you can see do not attach at all. And that is the axial skeleton. Now we are going to begin talking about the appendicular skeleton, starting with the pectoral girdle and our upper limbs. So right here we have the clavicles. Posterior we have our scapula, which is also our shoulder blades. You can see it through here as well. Right over here is our scapula. We have our humerus. We have our radius, which is the upper one right here. Good way to remember the radius is that it connects to your thumb. The ulna, which is right under, right over here. Perfect. So next we're going to move into our hand and wrist of our appendicular skeleton. Next we're going to discuss the hands and the wrist. So starting with the most distal part of the hand, we have our phalanges, and then we have our metacarpals. Our carpals is what makes the bones of the wrist. It is a little hard to distinguish the carpals on our skeleton model, but we will try our very best. So there are 8 in total, starting with the thumb, the most lateral. We have the trapezium, and then we have the trapezoid, and then we have the capitate, and then we have the hamate, and then we have the triquetrum. On top of the triquetrum sits another bone called the pisiform, which is right over here. It sits on top of the triquetrum. We have the lunate, which is up here, and then we have the scaphoid, which is more proximal to the trapezium. So this was the trapezium and this was the scaphoid. And those are our carpals. Next we have the pelvic girdle and then the bones of the leg. So our pelvic girdle consists of the ilium, which is the larger bone right here, the pubic bone or pubic symphysis, which is right over here, and the ischium, which is this part right here. We also have the femur bone right here, our patella, which is our kneecap, and then we also have our fibula, which is the smaller bone right here, and our tibia, which is the larger bone right here, the more medial bone. So next part of our appendicular skeleton that we are going to be discussing is the leg and ankle part of the appendicular skeleton. So we have the phalanges, which is the most distal part. Then we have the metatarsals, and then we have our actual tarsals, which is what helps make the ankle. So with our tarsals, our largest tarsal that we have is our calcaneus, which is what helps make the heel. And then we have the cuboid, which is right here. And then moving medially, we have 3 types of cuneiforms. So the different types of cuneiforms, we have the lateral cuneiform, the intermediate cuneiform, and then we have the medial cuneiform. Now moving closer to our leg bone, so moving more proximal, we have the navicular tarsal, and then we have our talus tarsal, which is right up here, and this is actually what sits onto the calcaneus. So this is the talus, this is the calcaneus. It's good to see different views. Perfect. And that is the overview of our axial and appendicular skeleton.